I lost all my motivation and energy and drive and ambition and sense of purpose by going through a spiritual awakening. I started out as being quite ambitious. I worked very hard. I had a full-time job and a side business, and I basically went from one task to the next and was never still, never present, was only interested in achieving and having fun and distraction and planning ahead for a potential future where I would achieve all my goals and do all the things I wanted to do. And that's really how I was wired prior to awakening. It was very busy, and so busy I got to a point of burnout, physical burnout. And so I went from that to having all of that stripped away incrementally through the awakening process. And this was quite a surprise to lose all of that through the process. It's necessary, and I understand that it had to happen, but it was a shock as I was going through it to go from being so energetic and motivated and so future orientated and having so many ideas about what I wanted to do and being sort of quite creative in that way to having all of that drop away, to having no motivation, to having no energy, to the point where it was difficult to work, difficult to come up with ideas for my business, difficult to be creative, and even difficult just to get energy for the day. So this served me to help to let go of the personal will, the egoic will that needs to deplete if we're going through a genuine awakening, to help us to open up to divine will, to thy will, to something different that's a different operating system. So first of all, we have to deplete the ways that the doer energy has been operating, and through its own force, through its own willpower and its own volition. And so we have got used to doing things in that way and have done it in that way our whole life and built up a certain way of doer energy where we are perhaps quite functional in the world, perhaps quite successful, perhaps quite efficient. And then all of a sudden, this starts to deplete and fall apart through the awakening process. So that can be quite unsettling. Many people have to even change the job that they're doing or go part-time because they can no longer operate in the same way with the same energy and life force that they had prior to awakening. So that can be quite an adjustment for some people. It certainly was for me. So the way that the doer energy, the personal will was depleted here was that I started to get burnout, so adrenal fatigue. So I couldn't actually keep up with my demands. So the body started to shut down and force me to have to be more present, to stop doing and to simplify my life. And so I had to go part-time. I had to start to put down my business and things. I had to close some doors, and I stopped being able to make plans for the future. And what this did is really support the awakening process. So it takes a bit of trust to trust that you can get through this phase of an adjustment that can feel a little bit scary because you're sort of wondering, how am I going to survive through this and do what I need to do to pay the bills? But it is a phase of awakening, particularly if we have very strong doer energy that needs to happen. It needs to be depleted, and there will be functioning that happens down the track, but there's sort of a deconstruction of your current life that happens to sort of get things more in alignment with awakening and with truth. I was very attached to the idea of purpose and meaning. I liked to think that there was a grand purpose that I had, and I wanted to find the best way I could serve in the world. I wanted to feel really useful. And so I chose jobs that were community based, that helped people because of this. But what I didn't realize is that drive that I had for purpose and meaning was actually trying to direct me towards spiritual awakening. And so once awakening had started, so what dropped with it was that sense of I need to find a purpose. And this was kind of sad initially because I was quite attached to that idea of some grand purpose. But then you start to see, well, that is a grand purpose, finding awakening. I mean, what could be better than that? And so it was just a bit of an adjustment, letting go of that attachment, that it's not going to be something in the world as I had anticipated, but it was to lead me to this very, interesting path, a unique path of unfolding where I was going to remember myself. That was the purpose all along, and what it had been driving that desire for meaning and purpose. But once I got in the flow of that, so it was just an adjustment period that was painful for a little while, perhaps. But once I got into the flow of it and realizing, oh, okay, this was divinely orchestrated, it's actually really wonderful. And so you start to get used to operating with less energy, operating with no motivation, just doing the basics to get through the day, to get through the awakening process. And then you start to find some pleasure in that, in the simplicity of life, in the stillness. And you start to not want to go back to that old way of pushing, of trying to do the next thing. That seems to be in real disharmony with where you're at once you've let that go. And so, although you may try, perhaps you try to, do a new job or a new project, and you might find you've got no energy for it anymore. And that's how we find out that things are different now. Something's changed. I'm not the same anymore, and I have to operate in a different way now that's more gentle, more in harmony with nature, more in harmony with the body and what the body wants. And it's a slower way of life. It's a simpler way of life, and things are different. They're never going to be how they were before that chapter's closed. So I guess the sooner you let go of that, trying to pick that back up again and trying to be how you were before, then the more peace and harmony you'll feel, just understanding that you're in a new chapter now and in a new way of life. And although it can feel a little strange as you transition over into that, once you surrender to it, you start to realize that it's much more enjoyable on this side of things in this new chapter. It's a lot more peaceful.